Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dr. Philip Phillips, and I'm the Associate Dean of the University Honors College. Along with Dean Weil, I want to welcome all of you here today. The Honors Lecture Series this semester is dedicated to the topic of suffrage, in part in recognition and leading up to the 100-year anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment of the Constitution. We've had a very successful series so far. I'm glad to see so many people in the room, not only the students, but also other people who are visiting, people from across campus, people from the community, students in other classes who found the topic interesting. And I'll just put in a plug for the Honors Lecture Series to say that it is both a class for students who want to graduate from the Honors College, and it's also an event that is free and open to the public. So I'm glad to see just about every seat in the classroom filled today. Dr. Mary Evans and I are very pleased to welcome today's speaker. Marian Ott has had a distinguished career as an engineer in New Jersey, California, and Nashville, and as a voter advocate. She earned her Bachelor of Science degree in engineering at Princeton University in the Department of Civil Engineering. She was magna cum laude, and her senior thesis was the recipient of various prizes. She also earned her Master of Science degree at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, in the Department of Civil Engineering. She is currently the president of the League of Women Voters of Nashville and Tennessee. She has served in this role from 2002 to 2004 and from 2015 to the present. I would note that the League of Women Voters is a non-partisan organization whose mission is to encourage informed and active participation in government, work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education and advocacy. While president, the League has done a number of things. It has filed a lawsuit against a repressive law regulating voter registration drives and related speech, successfully lobbied to remove voting inactivity as the basis for Tennessee voter registration list maintenance process, re-energized state-level advocacy efforts with a focus on election and related issues, testified to Tennessee General Assembly on numerous election-related topics, testified about open government topics, especially the need to keep the right to inspect public records without cost, has conducted multi-county poll-watching programs during several elections, and revitalized the League Observer Corps so that there is a League presence at the Tennessee State Election Commission. So her topic today is Tennesseans and Voting. Please join me in welcoming our speaker.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I think you're going to hear, hopefully you'll be able to tell as we go through the time, that I'm pretty passionate about a level playing field, that everybody gets a chance to vote. What I'd like to do today is to first tell you a little bit about the League, and then talk about, or set the stage for voting in Tennessee, and then talk about that voter drive registration bill, which was mentioned last week. I might have a few things to say about that. And then if we have any time, I'd like to touch on some other things that I also think are a challenge to voting in Tennessee. So there's been a lot in the media about Tennessee's pivotal role in the passage of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. And I'm not really going to tell you that story because you're going to hear from Carol Busey in a few weeks. Carol is a League member, a professor of history, and she will bring the story to life for you. I've known Carol for a long time. In fact, 24 years ago, when we were celebrating the 75th anniversary of this amendment, I had daughters in middle and elementary school. Did you know back then, I hope it's not true anymore, but Tennessee kids in school did not learn about the role the state played in passing the 19th Amendment? So the League did something to work on that. We commissioned a teacher's guide that Carol did that had segments for the students learning Tennessee history of the public schools, so the teachers had something to teach from about suffrage. If League of Women Voters people are nothing but not tenacious, it took 72 years from the start to actually getting this amendment passed. And the League itself comes out of that suffrage movement. We will actually turn 100 a little bit before the 19th Amendment. Our 100th anniversary as a national organization is February 14th, 2020. Let's see. I should say one more thing about the suffrage amendment. It is something greatly to be celebrated, but let's be honest, it gave people that look like me the vote. It didn't give every woman the vote. And it certainly didn't address the fact that back in 1920, there were a lot of men that didn't have the right to vote. You heard at the opening of this series from Dr. Sekou, and I think he gave you a good exposition of all the other work that had been done subsequent to the 19th Amendment about the Civil Rights Bill and the National Voting Rights Voter Registration Act. That kind of work is really important, and we have got to stay diligent, and we have to keep building on it to make sure that everyone has access to the ballot. And I can't go over all of those things, but I just want to put that out there that there's still a lot of work to do. So a little bit about the League. We got formed after women, or as women were getting the right to vote, because now there were all these new voters. They needed to be empowered. They needed to be educated. And so that is what the League of Women Voters is all about. We are nonpartisan, as it was said in the introduction. What that means is we never support or oppose a candidate as an organization. I mean, we have lots of members that take their own individual positions in our active, but you will not see the League ever speak out for a Republican or for a Democrat or against. So I would like to put out there this audacious claim that our democracy is stronger when every adult citizen participates. And the League, in its efforts to empower voters, does several things. First, we advocate for improved voting access for better election systems. We work to register voters. We also work to help voters get informed. We have I know they do some in Rutherford County here. We have candidate forums for local races. We used to host the presidential debates, but that's another whole story why I guess it was such a good idea that the parties decided they wanted to do it instead of have us do it. We also have an online voter guide. And one of the things that's unique about our guide, or our brand, if you will, is you need to go to primary sources. Our Vote 411 voter guide, the candidates are given questions, and their answers are published as they answer them. They misspell a word, we don't correct it. It's on them. We're not doing research about their positions. We're letting them speak to their positions. And I would just comment on some of the other issues that are in the news today. It's not a bad idea to go to the primary source. Of course, you might want to read some of the pundits and all. They're interesting. They're good perspectives. But make up your own mind. Make sure you at least know what the facts are, and you can read it yourself. And then finally, of course, we encourage people to go vote. And your vote does matter. I know a lot of people think, oh, I'm not going to bother to vote, especially not in Tennessee. We're a red state. I'm a Democrat. It's not going to matter. It does matter. First of all, you never know how close an election is going to be. I go to church with somebody who is running for the state senate. He lost his primary by 11 votes. The next Sunday, there were probably 24 people that came up to him and said, oh, I didn't know it was close, man. I would have voted for you. He lost an election because people didn't show up. Wilson County had an election decided, I think, by a coin toss. The state of Virginia had a house race there, state house race, decided by a flip of a coin. So voting matters. The other thing is, even if you're pretty confident that your candidate isn't going to win, it's still important to register your opinion. The margin of victory matters. and you should vote. Lecture over. Okay. Did you get that point? What should you do? Vote. However, in Tennessee, I think our foremothers are pretty disappointed in us. Voting turnout is low here, even by U.S. standards. We're like, in the 2016 election, 44th in registration and 47th in voter turnout. So here, we're the state that pushed the 19th Amendment into law, or into the Constitution, and we're like in the bottom 5 or 10 in participation. That's pretty bad. You can see, and these are from the presidential election, the U.S. as a whole, in my view, is pretty bad on overall voter turnout. Tennessee's even worse. Of course, not everyone is registered. That's why the percent registered voters participating is higher. This shows you who's registered to vote. So you have the U.S. and then you have Tennessee, and this was from the midterm elections. Young people are less likely to be registered than our older people. And in Tennessee, that remains true. And then when you look at who's voting, thank y'all, you're letting my generation make the decisions, but that's not as it ought to be. I think in the mayor's race we just had in Nashville, I think they said the young people's turnout was like 15%. That's really bad. So here's the context. We don't vote much in Tennessee. You could hypothesize a lot of reasons why. I would say part of it is it's not that easy to register to vote in Tennessee or to go vote. So that's the background. And here's what happens in the 2019 legislative season. You had a panel of state legislators here last week, and they talked some about this new voter registration law. Well, I'd like to spend some time talking about it, and I will be doing some fact checking. I might not directly call it out as such, but you can double check me if you want to. So this new voter registration law, it became law, it requires voter registration drives with any paid component to register with the state under the threat of civil and criminal fines and penalties for failing to comply. So any paid component. They didn't think the League of Women Voters was covered, but we are because we get grants to register voters, so that's pay. If you're a company and you provide a voter registration form for your new employees, you're probably covered under that law. That came out in the Senate committee testimony from Mark Goines, who is the state election coordinator. When asked that direct question, he was, yeah, I guess they would be. So the law requires every registration drive to be registered with the state, everyone that's going to be registering voters to take training and sign an affidavit that they took the training and that they will follow the laws of Tennessee. It limits how you pay workers, so you can't pay them per form turned in, and it sets a time frame for turning in forms. This is not an exhaustive list. These are some of the key measures. And just as an aside, so, I'm president of the League of Women Voters. I'm a little nervous about signing something subjecting the League and possibly me to a criminal penalty if we don't have our paperwork in here. There's been no regulations posted at this point, so we don't even know what the parameters around some of these things are. It also, and this is the only state that I'm aware of, and I'm pretty sure it's true, because I think Mark Goines said it was, that now imposes fines for what are called incomplete forms. An incomplete form is one, as you would expect, that doesn't have all of the fields filled out that are necessary for you to be viably registered to vote. So if you send in more than 100 incomplete forms, you're now subjecting yourself to civil penalties that could go as high as $10,000. Let's just put 100 forms in context. It's 10% of 1,000. It's only 1% of 10,000. And you didn't have to go to MIT to know that. That's pretty basic math. even the most diligent of voter registration efforts is going to result in some incomplete forms, and often at a much higher rate than just a few percent. It happens easily. You're at a big crush, people hand you the forms and run off, and then you realize they forgot to sign it or put their birthday on it or something like that, or because in Tennessee, you actually need to put your full Social Security number on the form, people seal it and hand it back to you. They didn't talk about this last week, but this bill also regulates voter communication. So if I have a pamphlet, or I go up to talk to you, or there's a league website or a ABC entity website encouraging you to register to vote, and there's a portal for you to click to start that, you have to include language such as, this is not authorized or in conjunction with the Secretary of State's office. And if you don't, it's a criminal penalty. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like a very friendly kind of thing to encourage people to cooperate with you. Believe me, I'm not for misleading come-ons and marketing, but my goodness, they're all over the place. Wait till you're Medicare age and see how helpful the world wants to be to help you sign up. This is just bad public policy in my view, or in the league's view. It has a chilling impact on voter registration drives. And that's really important. I mean, it's got an impact on the league, so I care a lot about that. But even more importantly, the league cares about the overall impact on voter registration drives in the state, because we know that those underrepresented groups, the young, people of color, communities of lower income, respond better to voter registration drives than they do to just generic register to vote. It's not rocket science. We're all more likely to do something if somebody we know or somebody like us says, hey, why don't you go do that? And it's probably, or we allege, unconstitutional, because voter registration and encouragement to voters to register, or citizens to register, is a basic political speech. So how come it became a law? In the 2018 midterms, there was a lot of effort, there was a lot of energy around the election and around getting people to register to vote, not just in Tennessee, across the country, but especially in Tennessee. And there's a new group in the state, goes by a couple of names, the Equity Alliance or the Black Voter Project. And they have said that across the state, they were able to register 90,000 voters. I don't know, and I'm taking their word at it, but I do know that in Shelby County, Memphis, there were probably close to the election registration deadline, about 10,000 forms submitted. And that really, really stressed the Shelby County Election Commission. By everyone's admission, including the Equity Alliance, there were a lot of incomplete voter registration forms. I've heard there's a miscommunication of information on both sides, but according to the Equity Alliance, they had talked with election officials who said you must turn in every form that somebody has given you back. And by the way, that would square with my understanding of what you need to do too. So they separated the forms into these are incomplete and these are complete. Another exacerbating issue is they used, in many cases, the National Voter Registration Form, which is completely legal, but you got to read the little footnote. Tennessee requires a full Social Security number, and the basic form only asks for your last four. Remember, when you submit a form before the deadline, even if it's incomplete, that person has met the time frame to register to vote. They must complete the form or provide the missing information before they can vote, but they've met the deadline. So it is important to send those forms in. So the election system there was stressed. The league actually helped out. We had members that went in pro bono and volunteered in the Shelby County Administration Office to help with all of that paperwork. So what is the league view? 10,000 voter registrations in Shelby County? Yes! We should celebrate this. I think that is in all issues. There's some miscommunication. I just talked about that. Many of the elements of the law are best practice, like having training for people that are going to register voters and turning forms in a timely manner. That's all best practice. And remember, I think everyone's got the same goal. We want people duly registered. There is no incentive for a voter registration drive to just throw in a bunch of forms that are incomplete, because the people aren't going to be registered to vote. If you want to get them to vote, they got to have a complete registration form. But as I said, sometimes things slip through, and there's a process to get that corrected or cured, I think is what the election officials call it. But collaboration, in my view, is way better than regulation, and certainly better than criminal penalties. But we didn't even try that. We just went straight to it. Well, let's remember, this is not about voter fraud. It's already against the law, and was before this 2019 law, to fraudulently register people to vote. And to the extent that that happened, the league would agree, send it to the DA and take some action against it. The other thing we should know is that the existing process worked. It identified the incomplete forms. It screened out people that might have signed up to vote that were ineligible, like people with a felony conviction. So it did what it was designed to do, and it worked. And our understanding, which is different than somebody on the panel last week, is that everybody who was registered to vote or filed a form in a timely manner got to vote in Shelby County. And I would also say anybody that showed up to vote, in fact, this is true in any election, if you show up to vote and you think you're registered and they tell you you are not, insist on a provisional ballot. That is your right. Now, it might not get counted. You have to go through a process to prove that, in fact, you are registered. But if for some reason you thought you told the DMV you wanted to be registered to vote and you're not on the rolls, they can go back and check whether you, in fact, told them. So always ask for a provisional ballot if there's any issue. Online voter registration was mentioned as, well, really, that's the savior for everything. The league loves online voter registration. We agree it is wonderful, that people should use it when they can. And guess what? It's always a complete application when you use an online voter registration, when you go to govotetn.com. So use that if you can. But it's not always possible. You have to have a state ID, essentially a license, to be able to use the online voter registration portal. If you don't have one, you can't even get started on the process. You have to know where you were registered to vote before. Now, Mark Goins said in the Senate testimony, if you submit a paper registration form and you leave blank your prior where you were registered before, they assume that they take that as a complete voter registration. It is a good idea to know where people were registered before, because we don't think you should be registered in more than one place. But honestly, if you're registering in a new county from an old county, from a prior county in Tennessee, they're going to catch it and fix it anyway. You got to have you got to have internet access. I mean, that's pretty obvious. And some people just frankly prefer paper. And there's another reason for paper, which is perhaps a little less obvious, and actually another piece of the law. Some voter registration drives want to save information on the voters that they're registering, because it is best practice if you're then going to do a get out the vote effort. The law requires now, if you do that, that there's got to be a disclosure somewhere so the voters know that you're saving that information. I think that's good practice. That ought to be done. But you can't do it if you just send them to govotetn.org or .com, because the state doesn't let you put one of those. Now I'm getting beyond what I know, but I think it's called an API over the portal, so you can collect some of the information. So what did the league do? We sued the state. The League of Women Voters. Hargett is Trey Hargett. And there's actually two lawsuits. We're one of them, and the other one is the NAACP and the Equity Alliance. The judge on September 12th issued a preliminary injunction, so the law will not go into effect until everything is heard. Basically, the judge said that it's very likely that the plaintiffs, i.e. us, are going to prevail in this lawsuit, that there's really no what did she say? Persuasive state interest that would require such a onerous bill, and especially since it doesn't apply to volunteer voter registration activities, which actually is another problem. That's a violation of the National Voter Registration Act. Before I take questions on this, and I was going to stop after this to let you answer, there were some comments last week about Colorado that this is not a big deal law, it's just modeled after what other states are doing, so, and Colorado was mentioned a lot. So I went in and checked up on what Colorado did. Well, first of all, they do regulate voter registration drives, but not with criminal penalties, just civil penalties. And they have no fine for incomplete forms. In fact, their directions say all forms must be turned in. But as long as we're talking about Colorado, there are some things to learn from Colorado that are great. They have an easy ID requirement. So your student ID would work, your insurance card would work. It doesn't have to be a photo ID. They have automatic voter registration. So when you go to get your Colorado driver's license, you're automatically registered to vote unless you opt out. Same as if you interact with other state agencies, typically, I don't know what they call TennCare in Colorado, but whatever their Medicaid is or food stamps, you would automatically be registered to vote. And everybody in Colorado gets a ballot to fill out and mail back in. Kind of eliminates the problem of being able to get to early voting or the polling place on election day. Those are great ideas. So, I went the wrong way. Okay, so I have some other things to talk about that I think are current challenges in our voting environment, but so much was said last week, and I just said a lot about this. I just thought maybe we should stop here, and I'll take some questions if there are any on the law and where we are and all that kind of thing. Yes?
There was a comment, of course we talked about the easy IDs, and there was a comment about fraudulent college IDs, about apparently half are fraudulent. What is your take on that?
Okay, well, I don't know whether college IDs are fraudulent or not, but I will tell you that in-person voter fraud is extremely rare. So the league would argue you don't even need a voter ID to vote, that if you're registered to vote, that should be good enough. But 33 or 5 states have some sort of ID requirement, but there's only 8 that require a government-issued ID, which is Tennessee is one of them. So in other states, you could show your voter ID, you could show your library card, you could show your voter registration card. You got something with your name on it. They're okay. They're okay with that. I thought of another little fact check thing your question prompted. I'm not sure why. So I think it was alleged that really this law can't be that bad because, well, the Shelby County Election Commission was for it, and we all know Shelby County is Democratic. Well, the second part of that statement is true, but that doesn't mean the Shelby County Election Commission is Democratic, because by law, every county election commission in Tennessee has 3 majority party members on it and 2 minority parties. And the Republicans are the majority party in the state, so they have 3 seats on every single county election commission. That's law. To the victors belong the spoils. I'm not arguing that that's wrong. I'm just saying that it's a non sequitur. They don't go together. That because the county is one, the election commission speaks for that party. Is there another question? Well, let me just talk a little bit about IDs. How many of you have in your possession or back at your place an original copy of your birth certificate? How many of you also have your original Social Security card? How many of you have both? Great. So you guys can go to the DMV and get an ID. The rest of you, it doesn't matter if it's free, you don't have the documents to get it. And by the way, there are only 37 DMV locations in the state of Tennessee, 3 of which are in Davidson County, and I'm guessing Shelby and Knox County might have more than 1. So that means less than 1/3 of the counties in Tennessee actually have a DMV office. There's not one in every county, as was stated last week. So it's not that easy to get this kind of ID. Just saying. And then, you could add on to it if you can't drive or don't have a car or, whatever. There's not too many counties have transit service when you think across the 99. I have to say, though, as much as we don't like the ID law, you saw the response last week. I'm not sure efforts to change it are going to get much traction in Tennessee. So one of the other issues that League is working on is restoration of voting rights eligibility. If you're formerly incarcerated, if you've committed a felon, it is an extremely complicated process to get your voting eligibility restored. There's this paperwork process you have to go through, but you can't even start that until you have repaid all fines and child support. You have to do that before you can even start the process. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole whys and the history because you're going to have really an expert on this talk to you in I don't remember which week, but after me in October, Professor Pippa Holloway. This is one of her big research areas, and she'll be able to give you a really good overview of the history of this and where we are. What I want to tell you is that this is an issue that the League is working with in coalition with other groups. So the first thing is getting your rights restored and what you owe in fines and child support. That should be decoupled. The whole issue of repaying fines and child support, that's a separate issue. It shouldn't have anything to do with restoring your voting eligibility. As an aside, though, Tennessee, I think, is the only state that requires you to be current with your child support before you can get your voting rights restored. And Tennessee is one of the few states that while you're incarcerated, your child support keeps accruing. You have no income, but your child support keeps accruing. So the first thing, I don't expect you to read this. Just look at, the point here is it's a big maze. So the first step is, because of my felony, the type of felony, can I even get my rights restored? So you have to go through this whole thing to figure out whether you're eligible. And then, if you are, you got to go through all of this. And that's after you get all your financial obligations met. And this requires you to go to a probation officer, and it requires you to go to the court clerk, and they both have to sign off on it. And we've heard one of them doesn't always want to sign if the other one's already signed, and it gets to be a big mess. And there was an example in the press recently of a woman who has a gun violation in New York because she didn't realize New York has gun control that we don't have in Tennessee. And so and that was a felony conviction. And she can't get her voting rights restored because the people in New York they don't want to sign this form. What are you talking about? You can vote. Yeah, you can in New York, but not in Tennessee. So it's further complications. And then once you go through all this and you get your rights restored, that's great. But now you move counties for your job. You have to start it all over again. It's like not a one and done. So there's a lot to work on there. And, like I told you, the League worked 72 years to get women, or the suffragists worked 72 years to get women the right to vote. So this is an issue there just might have to be incremental progress. Maybe we can get the system easier to navigate through. What we'll see. Why is it important? Well, it's a part of criminal justice reform, which is there's a bipartisan awareness in this country that we need to do something to reform our criminal justice system. I mean, even at the federal level, there's the First Step program that the Trump administration put out. And in fact, I'm going to attribute this to a person because I don't have any idea how he would know. But presidential advisor Jared Kushner has even said that the restoration of felon voting rights in Florida is good because they're registering as Republicans, which they may well be. I have no idea. And it doesn't matter to me. But I just think if we want people to become productive members of our community, we should welcome them back, and this is an easy thing we can do as a society. It doesn't cost us any money, and we can say, you did your time, now come back with us and participate in our community. And remember that audacious statement I said at the beginning. Our democracy is better when all citizens are able to participate in it. Then we get to the issue of people-powered fair maps, or gerrymandering. I think we had a presentation maybe by Dean Biles on gerrymandering. Gerrymandering discourages voters. Yeah, first of all, gerrymandering is the design. Every 10 years after the census, legislative districts have to be redrawn. And you redraw the congressional districts, you redraw the state, Senate, and House districts, and then at your county level, to the extent you have geographic boundaries on your districts like we do in Davidson County, you redraw the school board districts and the council districts. It's always been a political process, and it's always been both parties take advantage of it if they're in power, and the term gerrymandering comes from a representative gerrymander in New England years and years and years ago who drew this really weird kind of salamandering looking thing to pick the voters he wanted. The problem with it is, and it has gotten worse, and this is where technology has made it, taken it to a new level, because with computers and with big data, we can know, it's scary what is known about each of us. I mean, you can design voters down to a single street address and pretty much predict how the district would vote. To me, that's really scary. But it's not good because it encourages extremes in both parties. If you have a district that is primarily Democratic and it's whoever wins the Democratic primary is going to win it, and then you have somebody running in the Democratic primary, they're not really worried about people being too conservative. They're worried about if their opponent gets too liberal or too to the left, then maybe they'll lose too many voters. So everybody kind of moves over that way. And then you tend to have a more extreme person win because they're not worried about the general election. They know they got that. It's the primary that matters. And the opposite problem in a more conservative thing. And you ought to know the terms cracking and packing. So cracking is to move voters apart so that they're spread out among districts and they don't matter, or you pack them all into one district so their votes only matter in one, and then the rest of the districts you can get. Unfortunately, it is illegal, and I think the Supreme Court still upholds this. It is illegal to racially gerrymander, but it is not illegal to politically gerrymander. The Supreme Court has basically said that's up to the states. We don't have anything to do with that. So I'd just like to set a context for Tennessee. Here's a chart that shows the turnout, just because I think it's interesting, and the percent Republican vote and Democratic vote over the last 8 years in the major statewide races, which would be governor, senator, and president. And you can see, no surprise, of course, we know we're an overwhelmingly Republican state. I'm not sure how you average and figure out what percent you would expect us to be, but I'm going to pick 66%. I mean, it's a little higher than the last presidential election, but it's just remember that number. So here's what we have. I would say we're a little bit skewed toward one party here. You can make up what you want of it. These are sort of macro measures you can use to see how gerrymandered your state might be. Those of you that are mathematicians, there's a whole field emerging out there of how to measure how partisan a district map is by wasted, I think the term is wasted votes, and they figure out these complicated mathematical formulas. But here's what I think we should be thinking about. Well, the gold standard is an independent redistricting commission. I'm not suggesting that we're going to see that in Tennessee. I'm just telling you that's the gold standard. But I think there's a couple of things that as the state approaches drawing new legislative districts that we should keep in mind. The first is transparency. Government, it's of the people, by the people, for the people. We should see what's going on. So the discussions about how to develop our legislative district should be open for us to hear the debate. And there should be some, it's difficult to draw districts, and there's, we could each do it and come up with, 100 different maps. But there should be some guidelines, like keeping communities of interest together. You probably want to keep the city of Rutherford, of Murfreesboro together so they have a voice in the Tennessee legislature, or a couple of voices. I don't know how big you are. Like in Congress, Davidson County is almost big enough to be one district. You would think they should stay the base of a congressional district. Keep communities of interest together. Just a couple of words on election security. Glad to see the Senate finally has decided we ought to spend some money on cybersecurity. I really don't know much about that. The state, for good reason, won't talk about it, as they shouldn't, but they do claim they're working on it. They will tell you that our electronic voting machines are not connected to the internet, which that part is good. But again, the gold standard are paper ballots. The state does not mandate that county election commissions have paper ballots. And we're now in a cycle where most counties are either or about to buy new election equipment. I know Davidson County just did, and they did go to paper ballots. The election coordinator, Mark Goins, would say, well, it's probably best practice to get machines with paper ballots. That seems to be where the election administration community is going. And I think at the national level, I know the president has come out and said we need to have paper ballots. I also had a chance to go to an election security briefing by a FBI agent about a year ago. And actually, he thought the biggest threat to our election was misinformation campaigns and the fake news. Honestly, that kind of stuff's been going on since the beginning of time. It's just more out there now because technology makes it go further. So one thing I would just encourage you all to be is beacons of reasonableness. Go to as many first sources as you can. So that is, what did the candidates say? Not what did Axios or Breitbart say they said. What did they say? Try to find the clip on YouTube or the news, or go to their website. And so let's end on some good news. Election day vote centers. That was pioneered here in Rutherford County, and I've poll watched at many elections, and especially big ones, which tend to be the presidential elections. And honestly, guys, yeah, that's important. But who gets elected to your city council and school board probably affects your life more, just saying. The saddest thing is, it's 6:30, the polls are closing at 7, and somebody shows up to vote, and they've moved. Well, they can't vote there. They got to go over to the other place and vote. And you sit there going, well, there's paperwork that just got filled out, so now there's 25 minutes left. Are they really, A, going to bother to go to the other place, and B, are they going to get there in time? Because if you don't get there by 7, you can't vote. I mean, if you get in line by 7, that's fine. The Election Day Vote Center is really great because on Election Day, those same people can come in, they've moved, oh, okay, as long as it's within the county. And they just correct it, and the person gets their right ballot, and on you go. It's just like early voting. And you can, the devil's always in the details, but from our observations of Rutherford County, it was very well done. In some other states, when they've done something like this, it has been a little bit problematic because, well, maybe in certain parts of town, not enough machines were deployed, so they had longer wait times than other parts of town, which not good. Regardless of which part of town it is, everybody, if there's going to be wait times, it should be pretty much even, not 5 minutes in one place and 2 hours in another. But you're your election administrator, Alan Farley, did a really good job of managing that here. In fact, it was such a good job that this legislative session, 3 more counties are going to be able to do it. Williamson County, Wilson, and I think it's Monroe County. As much as I like them, I don't understand why you wouldn't want to just do it. But so I was asking some questions. In my home county of Davidson, people don't always want to do it because, we have 35 district council people. They like to know where their voters are, what their polls are. But more practically speaking, there's certain technical requirements to be able to do it. The first of which is you can't have a Wi-Fi access. You have to have a T-line for the voting equipment, and that's a security issue. And you can do that here in Rutherford County because your schools close on Election Day and you use schools and they already have that. That's not the case in Davidson County, so they don't have, they would have a problem being able to do that, and probably in some other counties. I think the online voter registration is another great thing that the state has done. It's good on all rounds, it makes it easier. Certainly, most people would be shocked if they couldn't do it, couldn't register online these days. And not only that, it's more accurate and it's cheaper administratively if we do it online. So I'm not against doing it online. I'm just against criminalizing it when you don't. And so my last words are, guess what? Register and vote. So are there any other questions or comments? Well, yes.
Why does Tennessee require your entire certificate number?
They claim that it is a fraud prevention technique. Now, one of the things, this is probably more than you want to know, but one of the issues I didn't talk about is voter registration list maintenance, or purging, as the other people told. Until 2017, the state used to purge people just because they weren't voting. If you didn't vote in 2 federal elections, it triggered you getting a letter, and if you ignored the letter, after 2 more, they just took you off the list. Well, that turns out is against the law, against the NVRA. And besides that, it's kind of dumb. Isn't it better to initiate that process if you get a change of address from the post office, or somebody turns in their Tennessee driver's license? It would happen more quickly. I mean, if I move right after the election, it could be 5-7 years before I'm taken off the voter registration rolls. And let me say, I'm not against cleaning up voter registration rolls because I think it helps with our election integrity if we don't have people registered in more than one place. So with the full Social Security number, they, I think, feel that they can, one, check your citizenship status better, because they are doing that. Check whether you're a felon, because they're running you through that database too. And then, and this is somewhat controversial, but they use cross-check to see whether you might be registered in some of the surrounding states. I don't think that they have as quick a trigger as some states, because there's this article I read about how actually statistically common it would be that Bill Smith, with his September 12th birthday, you could have several of those. And they were just looking at the first 4 letters of a last name and a birthday. Well, that's not really good enough. So, but I'm not sure you need a full social. I think the last 4, if that's all the other states have, would do it. And so that big purge in the, whatever that Chad hanging election in Florida was, another thing that happened is they had purged their voter rolls right before the election, and they'd used a list of felons to take them off the voting rolls. So if your name was, if there was a Bill Sullivan and a Bill O'Sullivan, they took you off. It was not the same person, but it was close enough for them. And the same if you were Bill William or Bill Williams, they just took you off. So, the best practice is you've got to match on 4, first, last, birthday, and last 4 of the social to make sure that it's the same person. All right, that was more than you want to know, but this can geek out on election stuff. But I guess the bottom line here is you've got to pay attention to what's going on, to make sure that we have a fair playing field here. I mean, this is a democracy. Let's let the ideas be out there and win one way or the other, not because somebody, you know, paid off the refs or changed the rules of the game or something.